He looked at her with eyes like shattered glass and said, "Do not mistake this ring for affection. You are a debt paid in full." That was the promise Dante Rossi made to his new bride on their wedding night. He was the butcher of Chicago, a man who didn't believe in love, only leverage. She was Sienna, the collateral damage of her father's gambling addiction. They said it was a marriage on paper. They said it meant nothing. But when a honeymoon in Italy turns into a bloodbath, the rules of the contract change. Because when you put a bullet between a man and his possession, you don't just wake the beast, you make him lose control. This is the story of how a fake marriage became a very real war. The rain in Chicago didn't wash away the sins of the city. It just made the pavement slicker for the getaway cars. Inside the erratic Gothic architecture of the Holy Name Cathedral, the air was freezing. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was the groom. Dante Rossi stood at the altar like a statue, carved from obsidian. He wasn't looking at the crucifix. He was checking the exits. At 32, Dante was the youngest Don the Rossi crime family had ever seen, and easily the most violent. They called him the Butcher, not because he enjoyed it, but because he was efficient. He cut off the rot before it spread. And today, the rot was the debts of Felix Blake. Sienna Blake walked down the aisle, her legs trembling beneath layers of imported silk and lace. She wasn't walking toward a husband, she was walking toward a prison sentence. Her father, Felix, gripped her arm, not in support, but in desperation. "Smile," Felix hissed, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. "Do not embarrass me, Sienna. If you trip, he kills me. If you cry, he kills me." Sienna didn't look at her father. She stared straight ahead at the back of Dante's head. She had only met him once, at the negotiation table where her life was traded for $3 million in gambling debts and a shipping route in the New York harbor. He hadn't looked at her then, either. When she reached the altar, Dante finally turned. The breath hitched in Sienna's throat. He was devastatingly handsome, in the way a storm is beautiful before it tears your house apart. High cheekbones, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes that were a terrifying shade of slate gray. There was no warmth in them, no curiosity. "Let's get this over with," Dante said. His voice was a low rumble, audible only to her and the priest. The ceremony was a blur of Latin and lies. When the priest asked for the rings, Dante slid a diamond the size of a knuckle duster onto her finger. It felt heavy. It felt like a shackle. "I do," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the rain hammering the roof. "I do," Dante said, sounding like he was signing a death warrant. The reception was held at the Rossi estate in Lake Forest. It was a fortress of limestone and iron gates. Men with bulges under their tuxedo jackets lined the perimeter. This wasn't a party, it was a summit of the 5 families. Sienna stood by the champagne tower, her feet aching. She felt invisible, a prop used to signal that the Rossi family was expanding. Suddenly, a hand gripped her elbow, hard. She gasped, turning to find Dante looming over her. Up close, he smelled of expensive scotch, gunpowder, and expensive cologne. "Upstairs," he commanded. "But the guests are drinking my liquor and plotting my death. They don't need us to watch. Upstairs. Now." He led her to the master suite. It was austere, modern, and cold. Black marble floors, grey walls, and a bed that looked like it had never been slept in. Dante closed the door and locked it. The click echoed like a gunshot. He turned to her, loosening his tie with a sharp jerk. Sienna backed up until her legs hit the edge of the bed. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Dante," she started, her voice shaking. I know you didn't want this." Dante laughed. It was a dry, humourless sound. He walked over to a side table and poured a glass of water, ignoring the alcohol. Control. Always control. "Listen to me very carefully, Sienna," he said, turning to face her. He didn't step closer. He stayed 5 feet away, a chasm of emotional distance between them. "I am going to tell you the rules of this arrangement exactly once. If you break them, you will be on a plane to a convent in Switzerland within the hour." Sienna straightened her spine. She might be sold, but she wasn't weak. "I'm listening. Rule 1. You do not ask about my business, ever. What you hear, you forget. What you see, you didn't see." "Fine," she said. "Rule 2. In public, you are the devoted wife. You smile, you hold my hand, you look at me like I hung the moon." In private, he gestured vaguely at the space between them. "You stay out of my way." Sienna felt a sting of humiliation, but she swallowed it. And Rule 3? Dante stepped closer then, invading her personal space. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could see the flecks of silver in his iris. "Rule 3, he whispered, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "This marriage means nothing. There will be no intimacy. There will be no trying to make it work. You are here to keep your father alive and to secure my alliance with the unions. Do not mistake this ring for affection. You are a debt paid in full. Do not touch me, and I will not touch you." Sienna looked him dead in the eye. "You think I want you to touch me? You're a monster, Dante. I'm here because I had no choice." For a second, something flickered in Dante's eyes. Surprise? Respect? It was gone too fast to tell. "Good," he said, straightening his suit jacket. "Pack a bag. We leave for Italy in 4 hours." "Italy?" "The honeymoon," Dante said, checking his watch. "The commission expects us to look like newlyweds. We are going to the Amalfi Coast. Try not to look so miserable. It's bad for business." The private jet was a Gulfstream G650, outfitted with cream leather and mahogany. It was silent, save for the hum of the engines. Dante spent the entire 9-hour flight typing on a laptop, wearing noise-cancelling headphones. Sienna read the same page of her book 20 times. They landed in Naples and took a helicopter to the private cliffside estate in Ravello, the Villa Simbrone. It was breathtaking. Ancient stone arches, gardens hanging over the azure sea, the scent of lemons and salt in the air. It was paradise. And for Sienna, it was just a prettier cage. The staff greeted them with bowed heads. "Don Rossi, Donna Rossi." Donna Rossi. The name tasted like ash in her mouth. "Dinner is at 8 on the terrace," Dante said, walking past her toward his study. "Wear the red dress." "I didn't pack a red dress," Sienna called after him. Dante stopped but didn't turn around. "I know. I had one bought for you. It's on the bed." He walked away. Sienna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. He had gone through her luggage? Or had he just anticipated her wardrobe lacked the Mafia wife aesthetic? At 8 o'clock, she walked onto the terrace. The dress was silk, crimson, and backless. It clung to her curves like a second skin. She felt exposed, vulnerable. Dante was already seated, a bottle of Barolo open on the table. He stood when she approached. His eyes swept over her, lingering for a fraction of a second on the curve of her hip before snapping back to her face. "Adequate," he muttered, pulling out her chair. "You're charming," Sienna retorted, sitting down. The dinner was an exercise in torture. The view was romantic, the food was Michelin star quality, and the company was absolute zero. "So," Sienna said, breaking the silence, "who are you afraid of?" Dante stopped cutting his steak. The knife screeched softly against the china. "Excuse me?" "The guards," Sienna said, gesturing to the shadows where men with earpieces stood. "There are 6 of them just for dinner. We are in a private villa on a cliff. Who are you afraid of, Dante?" Dante took a sip of wine. "Fear is for people who can't control the outcome. I am not afraid. I am prepared." "Prepared for what?" "For the O'Malleys," he said, surprisingly candid. "Cillian O'Malley wasn't happy about our wedding. He wanted the shipping routes your father pawned off to me." "So I'm a target," Sienna realized, her appetite vanishing. "You are a Rossi now," Dante said simply. "You are always a target. But you are safe here. No one can get into the villa without my knowing." As if the universe wanted to prove his arrogance wrong, the lights on the terrace suddenly cut out. Pitch black. "Get down!" Dante's voice roared from the darkness. Sienna froze. Before she could process the command, a heavy hand grabbed her wrist and yanked her out of the chair. She hit the stone floor hard, scraping her knees. Foot. Foot. 2 sounds like spit hitting a hot pan. Silenced gunshots. The stone balustrade where Sienna's head had been a second ago exploded into dust. "Move!" Dante was on top of her, shielding her body with his own. He was heavy, solid muscle. He smelled of adrenaline now. He dragged her across the terrace, staying low. More shots whizzed past, chipping the ancient stonework. The guards were shouting, returning fire into the darkness of the gardens below. Dante kicked open the terrace doors and shoved Sienna into the library, slamming the heavy oak doors and bolting them. He didn't stop there. He grabbed a massive bookshelf and, with a grunt of primal exertion, tipped it over in front of the doors. The room was dark, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the high windows. Sienna was hyperventilating, her back pressed against a desk. "You said we were safe." Dante turned to her. In the moonlight, he looked demonic. His suit was dusty, his hair disheveled. He was holding a gun she hadn't even seen him draw. "Someone on the inside sold us out," he snarled. He moved to the window, peering through the blinds. "They bypassed the perimeter alarms. That means they have the codes." He looked back at her. For the first time, the icy mask was gone. He looked furious, possessive. "Are you hit?" he demanded. "I don't think so." He crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't ask permission. His hands were on her, checking her arms, her torso, her legs. His touch was rough, urgent, clinical but searingly hot. "You're bleeding," he said, his voice dropping an octave. Sienna looked down. A shard of stone from the balustrade had sliced her upper arm. Blood was trickling down onto the red silk. "I'm fine," she stammered. "You are not fine," Dante snapped. He ripped his silk tie off and wrapped it around her arm, pulling it tight. Their faces were inches apart. The adrenaline was pumping through both of them, a toxic cocktail of fear and survival. Sienna looked up at him, and for a moment, the business-only contract evaporated. She wasn't furniture. She was the woman he had just thrown his body over to save. "Stay here," Dante commanded, checking the magazine of his pistol. "Do not move. If the door opens and it isn't me, you shoot." He pressed a second gun, a smaller, cold piece of metal, into her trembling hand. "Dante, don't go," she whispered. The plea slipped out before she could stop it. He paused, his hand on the handle of a hidden panel in the wall. He looked back at her, his expression unreadable. "I have to kill them, Sienna," he said, his voice devoid of humanity. "They ruined my dinner." He vanished into the secret passage, leaving her alone in the dark with a gun she didn't know how to use, and a heart that was beating way too fast for a marriage that meant nothing. Sienna sat in the dark for what felt like hours, though it was likely only 20 minutes. The sounds of violence outside were muffled, but terrifying. Shouts, the distinct crack of unsilenced gunfire. Then, silence. The silence was worse. Suddenly, The hidden panel in the wall slid open. Sienna raised the gun with shaking hands. "Put it down, Tesoro." It was Dante. He stepped into the moonlight, and Sienna gasped. His white shirt was soaked in blood, and it wasn't all his. He had a cut above his eyebrow that was bleeding freely, blinding him in one eye. "We have to leave," he said, his breathing heavy. "Now. My security team is compromised. I can't trust the extraction team." "Where are we going?" Sienna asked, scrambling to her feet. "There's a boathouse down the cliff, an old fisherman's skiff. We go by water." The descent was a nightmare. Dante led her down a treacherous, hidden staircase carved into the cliff face. It was pitch black, slippery with sea spray. Dante moved slower than usual, favoring his left side. When they reached the small motorboat, Dante struggled to untie the rope. His movements were jerky. "Let me do it," Sienna said, pushing his hands away. She undid the knot with nimble fingers. She had grown up on the Chicago River. She knew knots. Dante looked at her, surprised again. He started the engine, and they roared away from the coast, disappearing into the blackness of the Tyrrhenian Sea. They drove for an hour, the wind whipping Sienna's hair into a frenzy. Dante navigated by the stars and the distant lights of the coast, heading away from the civilization of Amalfi toward a small, rugged island. He docked the boat at a rotting wooden pier attached to a small stone cottage. It looked abandoned. "My grandfather's old smuggling hideout," Dante grunted as he climbed out. He stumbled, falling to one knee. "Dante!" Sienna jumped out and grabbed him. He was burning up. She helped him into the cottage. It was dusty, smelling of old wood and salt. There was a generator. Dante pointed to it. Sienna found the cord and pulled. Lights flickered on, revealing a Spartan room with a cot, a table, and a first aid kit on the wall. Dante collapsed onto the cot. He stripped off his ruined jacket and shirt. Sienna covered her mouth. There was a bullet hole in his left side, just above the hip. It wasn't gushing, but it was ugly. "Through and through," Dante gritted out, his teeth clenched. "Missed the vital organs, but it needs cleaning and stitching." He looked at her. The great Mafia boss, the butcher, looked at her with glazed eyes. He was fading. "I can't do it myself, Sienna." Sienna looked at the wound, then at him. She felt bile rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. "Tell me what to do." For the next hour, Sienna became a field medic. Under Dante's strained instructions, she boiled water, sterilized the needle, and cleaned the wound with high-proof grappa found in the cupboard. When she had to pour the alcohol into the raw wound, Dante arched his back, a guttural roar of pain escaping his throat. He gripped the metal frame of the cot so hard the metal groaned. I'm sorry," Sienna whispered, her tears mixing with the sweat on his skin. "Sew it," he gasped. "Do it." Her hands, usually so steady when she painted or cooked, were trembling, but she forced them to be still. She pushed the needle through his tough skin. 1 stitch, 2, 3. Dante watched her the whole time. He didn't pass out. He focused on her face, on the furrow of her brow, on the way she bit her lip. It was the only thing keeping him tethered to consciousness. When she tied the final knot and bandaged him, she slumped back onto the floor, exhausted. Her red dress was ruined, stained with his blood. "You did good," Dante whispered. His voice was raspy. Sienna looked up at him. "You took a bullet. Occupational hazard." "No," she said, crawling on her knees until she was beside the cot. "You took it when you shielded me. You were on my left. The shot came from the left." Dante closed his eyes. "Rule 3, Sienna. Don't read into things." "Screw Rule 3, she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and relief. "You saved my life." Dante opened his eyes. The grey was darker now, dilated with pain and something else. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, exposed nerve. "You're my wife," he said. "Nobody touches what is mine." "Is that all I am? A possession?" Sienna challenged him. She was close enough to feel the heat radiating off him. Dante reached out. His hand, calloused and stained with dried blood, cupped her cheek. It was the first time he had touched her with anything resembling gentleness. "You should be," he murmured, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "It would be easier if you were just a possession, but you are inconveniently brave." The air in the small cottage grew heavy. The smell of blood and antiseptic was overwhelmed by the scent of them. "Dante," she breathed. "Walk away, Sienna," he warned, though his hand didn't leave her face. "I am not a good man. I am high on pain and violence. If you stay here, I will break Rule 3, and I won't stop." Sienna didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch. The fear of the shooting had stripped away the pretense. She wanted to feel alive. She wanted to feel him. "Break it," she whispered. Dante didn't hesitate. He pulled her down onto the narrow cot with a groan that was half pain, half hunger. When he kissed her, it wasn't a wedding peck. It was a claiming. It was rough, desperate, and tasted of iron and grappa. Sienna kissed him back with equal force, her hands tangling in his hair, careful of his wound, but needing to be close. Outside, the storm raged against the small stone cottage. Inside, the contract was burning to ash. The butcher of Chicago had lost control. The morning sun pierced the dusty windows of the fisherman's cottage like an interrogation lamp. Sienna woke first. For a moment, disoriented by the smell of sea salt and dried blood, she forgot where she was. Then she felt the weight on her waist. Dante's arm was thrown over her, heavy and possessive even in sleep. They were tangled together on the narrow cot, her head resting in the crook of his shoulder. She could feel the steady thrum of his pulse against her cheek. The memories of the previous night crashed down on her. The terror of the ambush, the blood, the stitching, and then the shift. The moment the butcher of Chicago had looked at her, not as a contract, but as a lifeline. She carefully tried to shift away, mindful of his wound. But the moment she moved, his arm tightened. It wasn't a conscious embrace. It was a reflex, a predator ensuring its prize hadn't escaped. Dante's eyes snapped open. There was no grogginess, no slow wake-up. He went from asleep to fully alert in a microsecond. He looked down at her, and she saw the exact moment the walls slammed back up. The vulnerability of the night before evaporated, replaced by the stony facade of Don Rossi. He pulled his arm back as if he'd been burned. "How is the wound?" Sienna asked, her voice quiet, trying to bridge the sudden chasm between them. Dante sat up, swinging his legs over the edge of the cot, putting his back to her. He hissed in pain as the movement pulled at the fresh stitches. "It holds." He stood up, walking over to the small sink to splash cold water on his face. When he turned back, he was composed, terrifying, and utterly distant. "Last night," he began, his voice devoid of inflection. "It was a mistake. Adrenaline and blood loss make men do foolish things. It won't happen again. Rule 3 remains in effect." Sienna felt like he'd slapped her. She wrapped the thin woolen blanket around her nakedness, suddenly feeling very small. "A mistake? You almost died. I saved you. We connected. Don't pretend you didn't feel that." Dante's jaw clenched. He walked over to where his ruined shirt lay and pulled a satellite phone from the pocket. "What I feel is irrelevant, Sienna. What matters is survival. And what happened last night. Feelings make you weak. They make you hesitate. In my world, hesitation gets you buried. "You're lying," she challenged, standing up, letting the blanket fall. She didn't care about modesty right now. She wanted him to look at her. "You're scared. The big bad butcher is scared because he actually felt something human for the first time in his miserable life." Dante froze. He slowly turned his head to look at her. His eyes were shards of ice. "Do not push me, Sienna. You have no idea what I am capable of when I lose control. Last night was the mild version." "Show me the real version, then," she retorted, her heart pounding, "because I'd rather have a monster who feels something than a statue who feels nothing." For a terrifying moment, she thought he might strike her. The violence radiated off him in waves. But then he looked away towards the window. "Get dressed," he commanded. "I made contact. A boat is coming in 20 minutes. We need to be ready." "Ready for what? Going back to the villa to get shot at again?" "No. We are going on the offensive. Someone close to me gave O'Malley the security codes. Someone I trusted. I am going to find out who, and I am going to peel the skin from their bones while they are still alive." He looked back at her, his eyes flat. "And you are going to help me?" Sienna shivered. This was the man she had married, the man who could plan torture while putting on his shoes, the man she had just slept with. She found an old fisherman's sweater and a pair of oversized canvas trousers in a trunk. They smelled of mildew, but it was better than her ruined silk dress. The boat that arrived was not a luxury yacht. It was a rigid, inflatable boat, manned by 3 men, heavily armed with assault rifles. They didn't speak. They just nodded to Dante. The ride back to the mainland was brutal. The sea was choppy, each wave slamming into the hull, sending jolts of pain through Dante's side, though he never made a sound. He sat at the stern, eyes scanning the horizon, his hand never straying far from the gun tucked into his waistband. Sienna sat in the bow, the spray hitting her face, watching him. They didn't go back to the Amalfi villa. They docked in a grungy industrial port in Naples, smelling of diesel and rotting fish. An armored SUV was waiting. As they drove through the chaotic streets of Naples, Dante finally spoke to her again. "We are going to a safe house in the city. My capo here, Matteo, will meet us. He swears loyalty. He claims the leak must have come from the Chicago end." "Do you believe him?" Sienna asked. Dante looked out the tinted window. "Matteo has been with my family since before I was born. He was my father's right hand." He turned to Sienna. "Which makes him the perfect suspect. Only someone who knows the architecture of my organization could have dismantled the security so effectively. So what are we walking into?" "A trap," Dante said calmly. "Either for me or for him." He reached into the console and pulled out a sleek, compact 9mm pistol. He ejected the magazine, checked it, slapped it back in, and racked the slide. He held it out to her. Sienna stared at the gun. "I don't know how to use that." "You learned how to stitch a bullet wound last night. You can learn to shoot, point, squeeze. Don't hesitate. If things go bad, don't wait for me to save you. You save yourself." Sienna took the gun. It was cold and heavy. It felt real. It felt like her new life. "Dante," she said, her voice unsteady. "If it is Matteo, what will you do?" Dante's expression didn't change. "I'm the butcher, Sienna. I do what is necessary." The safe house in Naples was an apartment above a noisy bakery in the Spanish Quarter. The air smelled of yeast and exhaust fumes. It was crowded, loud, and the perfect place to disappear. Dante was deteriorating. The adrenaline had worn off, and the reality of a through-and-through gunshot wound was setting in. His skin was grey, sweat beaded on his forehead, and his movements were stiff, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning every shadow. "Sit down before you fall down," Sienna snapped, pushing him towards a worn velvet armchair in the living room. "I'm fine," he grunted. But he sat. She checked his bandages. The bleeding had slowed, but the area around the wound was angry and inflamed. He needed antibiotics and rest, neither of which he was likely to get. There was a knock on the door. 3 rhythmic raps, a pause, then 2 more. Dante pulled his large handgun from his waistband and rested it on his thigh, hidden beneath a newspaper. He nodded to Sienna. "Let him in. Stay behind him." Sienna gripped the small 9mm in her pocket, her palms sweating. She walked to the door and peered through the peephole. It was an older man, maybe 60, with silver hair and a face weathered by years of hard living. He looked like a kindly grandfather, except for the coldness in his eyes. "Who is it?" she called out. "Matteo, open up, Donna Rossi. I come alone, as instructed." She unlocked the door. Matteo stepped inside, his eyes immediately darting to Dante, sitting in the chair. He removed his flat cap, clutching it to his chest. "Don Dante," Matteo said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank God. When I heard about the villa, I thought the worst." "Almost," Dante said, his voice raspy. "They missed the important bits. Come in, Matteo. Sit." Matteo took a seat on the couch opposite Dante. Sienna moved to the kitchen area, standing behind Matteo, her hand tight on the gun in her pocket. The air in the small room was suffocatingly tense. "Tell me what you know," Dante demanded. "It's chaos, Don," Matteo said, leaning forward, wringing his cap. "O'Malley has people everywhere. He's claiming you're dead, and he's moving on your territories in New York. The commission is spooked. They think the Rossi family is leaderless." "And the leak?" Dante asked, watching the older man intently. "I've been turning over rocks all night," Matteo said, shaking his head sadly. "I think it was young Luca, the new guard on the terrace. He's missing. His bank account shows a deposit from a shell company linked to the Irish." Dante didn't blink. "Luca, the boy you vouched for last month, the one whose sister you are paying through university." Matteo stiffened slightly. "Yes. It breaks my heart. A betrayal like that." "Liar," Dante whispered. The word hung in the air. Matteo's grandfatherly facade cracked for just a fraction of a second. "Don Dante." "Luca didn't have the clearance for the perimeter codes," Dante said, his voice gaining strength from his fury. "Only 3 people had those codes. Me, my head of security in Chicago, and you." Dante shifted, wincing as he leaned forward. "You were my father's friend. You bounced me on your knee. Why, Matteo?" Matteo stared at Dante for a long moment. Then the pretense dropped completely. He didn't look sad anymore. He looked tired and bitter. "Because you are reckless, Dante," Matteo spat. "Your father, he understood balance. He understood that sometimes you let things slide to keep the peace. You are a sledgehammer. You cut, you burn, you destroy. You are bad for business." "The commission agrees." "The commission backed O'Malley?" Dante asked. They looked the other way. O'Malley promised stability. He promised the shipping routes would remain open without your theatrical violence. Matteo slowly reached for his jacket pocket. "It's over, Dante. You're wounded. You're alone. The O'Malleys are downstairs." Sienna's heart leaped into her throat. They were trapped. "Don't move your hand, Matteo," Dante said, raising the newspaper to reveal the gun pointed squarely at Matteo's chest. "You won't shoot." Matteo smiled grimly. "Not here. Too much noise. The police are already on edge." "You think I care about noise?" Dante cocked the hammer. "Dante!" Sienna shouted as she saw Matteo's hand whip out of his pocket. He wasn't reaching for a gun. He held a small, silver flashbang grenade. Matteo pulled the pin and dropped it on the floor. "Down!" Dante roared, throwing himself out of the chair. Bang! The room exploded in blinding white light and an ear-shattering noise. Sienna was thrown backward against the kitchen cabinets, her vision completely gone. Her ears rang fiercely. She blinked desperately, trying to clear the spots from her eyes. Through the haze, she saw shapes moving. Matteo was at the door, yanking it open. Dante was on the floor, struggling to rise, his wound clearly agonizing him. He raised his gun, firing blindly toward the door. Blam! Blam! Wood splintered around the doorframe, but Matteo was already outside. "Sienna, the window!" Dante yelled over the ringing in her ears. He grabbed her wrist, dragging her towards the fire escape window in the bedroom. Behind them, heavy boots thundered up the stairs of the bakery. O'Malley's men. Dante kicked the window frame out. They scrambled onto the rusty metal fire escape. Below them, an alleyway teemed with trash and shadows. "Go!" He pushed her towards the ladder. "Not without you!" she cried. He was leaning heavily against the railing, his face white as a sheet. The exertion had torn his stitches. Fresh blood stained his shirt. "I'll slow you down," he gasped. "They want me. Get to the street. Blend into the crowd." "No!" Sienna grabbed his arm, surprising herself with her strength. "You said I was yours. You don't leave what's yours behind." She hooked her arm under his good side and practically dragged him down the fire escape. They hit the alley floor, just as the apartment door above them burst open. "There, in the alley!" a voice shouted in a thick Irish brogue. Gunfire erupted from above, bullets sparking off the metal fire escape and the cobblestones around their feet. "Move, Sienna!" Dante snarled, shoving her behind a large metal dumpster. He returned fire, his shots precise despite his condition, forcing the shooters above to take cover. They were pinned down. There was one way out of the alley, a narrow archway leading to a busy market street about 50 yards away. But to get there, they had to cross open ground. Dante checked his magazine. "I have 4 rounds left. How many do you have?" Sienna pulled out the gun he'd given her. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. "I don't know. It's full, I think." "Listen to me," Dante said, gripping her shoulders. His grey eyes burned into hers. "I'm going to provide cover fire. You run for that archway. Do not look back." "But, Sienna, this is not a debate. Go!" He spun around the edge of the dumpster and fired 3 quick shots up at the window. "Now!" Sienna ran. She ran faster than she ever had in her life. The air cracked around her as bullets whizzed past. She heard Dante fire his last shot. She reached the archway and slid around the corner, pressing her back against the cold stone. She was safe. She looked back. Dante hadn't followed her. He was still behind the dumpster, slumped over, his gun empty on the ground beside him. 2 men were descending the fire escape. Sienna Blake had spent her entire life being a victim of powerful men. Her father, her husband. But Sienna Rossi was different. Sienna Rossi had stitched up a Don. Sienna Rossi had seen the butcher bleed. She looked at the gun in her hand. Point. Squeeze. Don't hesitate. She stepped back out from the archway, into the line of fire. She raised the gun with both hands, aiming at the man halfway down the ladder. She took a breath, just like Dante had shown her, and she squeezed the trigger. The recoil of the 9mm was shocking. It didn't feel like the movies. It felt like a hammer striking the bones of her wrist. The shot went wide, sparking off the iron railing of the fire escape, but the sound was thunderous in the narrow alley. The man on the ladder flinched, instinctively ducking his head. That split second was all the time Dante needed. Despite the agony tearing through his side, Dante lunged for his fallen gun. He didn't rise to his feet. He rolled onto his back, gritted his teeth, and fired upward. Crack, crack. The man on the ladder jerked violently, losing his grip. He tumbled down, crashing onto the dumpster lid with a sickening metallic thud. The second man, still at the window, scrambled back inside the apartment, realizing the helpless targets were biting back. "Sienna!" Dante's voice was a raw scrape. "Run!" But Sienna didn't run away. She ran to him. She holstered her weapon, a movement that felt unnaturally natural, and hauled Dante to his feet. He was heavier now, his strength failing as the blood loss caught up to him. "We can't go to the market," Dante wheezed, his arm draped over her shoulders, his feet dragging on the cobblestones. "Too open. Snipers." "Then where?" Sienna demanded, scanning the end of the alley. Sirens were wailing in the distance. The flashbang had alerted the carabinieri. "The catacombs," Dante whispered, his head lolling. "Entrance behind the old church. San Gennaro." Sienna didn't ask questions. She became a creature of instinct. She half-carried, half-dragged one of the most dangerous men in the world through the labyrinthine back streets of Naples. She avoided the main roads, ducking into doorways whenever she heard a scooter engine. They reached the rear of the crumbling San Gennaro church. The iron gate was rusted shut. Sienna didn't hesitate. She used the butt of her gun to smash the padlock. It took 3 strikes, her hand screaming in protest, but the lock gave way. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of centuries-old earth. They descended into the darkness. Dante collapsed against a stone sarcophagus. His skin was clammy, grey as the stone behind him. "Phone," he murmured, his eyes fluttering shut. "Call Enzo. Chicago." Sienna fished the satellite phone from his pocket. Her hands were covered in his blood. She dialed the number stored as underboss. "Rossi?" A gruff voice answered on the first ring. "No," Sienna said, her voice echoing in the tomb. "This is Mrs. Rossi." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Sienna? Put Dante on." "Dante is down," Sienna said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "We were ambushed in Naples. Matteo betrayed us. We are at the San Gennaro catacombs. We need extraction. Now." "Matteo?" Enzo sounded horrified. "Sienna, listen to me. If Matteo turned, the whole network in Italy is burned. I can't send local guys. They might be on O'Malley's payroll." "Then come yourself," Sienna snapped, "or send the ghost squad. I don't care. Just get us out. We have maybe an hour before they sweep the area. I'm 10 hours away by plane, Sienna." "Then you better fly fast," she said. "In the meantime, tell the Commission that Dante Rossi is alive. Tell them that anyone who moves on his territory while he bleeds will be hunted down by his wife." "And Enzo?" "Yes?" "Tell them I don't miss." She hung up. Dante was watching her. One eye was open, a ghost of a smile playing on his pale lips. "You lied," he whispered. "You missed the first shot." Sienna dropped to her knees beside him, tearing a strip from her canvas trousers to replace his soaked bandage. "Shut up, Dante. I'm improvising." For the next 6 hours they sat in the dark. Sienna kept him talking, terrified that if he fell asleep, he wouldn't wake up. "Why me?" she asked him in the quiet dark. "At the wedding. You could have had anyone. Why did you agree to my father's deal?" Dante's breathing was shallow. "I didn't want a wife who wanted the life. The Mafia princesses, they are vicious. They want the power. I wanted someone innocent. Someone who wouldn't try to run my empire." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I thought you were a lamb, Sienna. I was wrong. You're a lioness." "You made me this way," she said softly, stroking his damp hair. "No." Dante closed his eyes. "It was always there. I just gave you the gun." Just as Sienna thought the silence would swallow them, beams of tactical light cut through the gloom. "Clear!" a voice shouted. "Identify!" Sienna raised Dante's gun, her hand steady. "Rossi!" 6 men in full tactical gear emerged from the shadows. They weren't Italian police. They wore black uniforms with no insignias. The Rossi personal guard from Chicago. They had made it. The extraction was a blur. A private ambulance to a secure airfield. A medical jet equipped with a trauma team. Sienna didn't leave his side. When the doctors tried to push her out of the operating room on the plane, Dante, half sedated, grabbed the surgeon's wrist. "She stays," he growled. So she stayed. She watched them cut him open, repair the damage, and stitch him back together. She watched the blood transfusions. She watched the heart monitor beep steadily, reassuring her that the contract was still valid. When they landed in Chicago, it was raining again. But this time, Sienna didn't feel cold. She felt like she was walking into a war she had already won. 3 weeks later. The recovery had been brutal, but Dante Rossi was not a man who stayed in bed. He healed with a terrifying speed, fueled by vengeance. But something had changed in the Rossi household. Sienna no longer slept in the guest room. She slept in the master suite, in the center of the massive bed. And she no longer waited for permission to speak. The commission had called a summit. The Peace Conference. It was held at a neutral location, the Lyric Opera House of Chicago. The 5 families, the O'Malleys and the Russian Bratva, were all in attendance. They expected Dante to be weak. They expected him to send a proxy. The double doors of the grand foyer swung open. Dante walked in. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than a house, tailored to hide the bandages beneath. He looked impeccable. Lethal. The butcher was back, but the room didn't go silent because of Dante. They went silent because of who was on his arm. Sienna wore a gown of black velvet that absorbed the light, with a slit up to her thigh and diamonds dripping from her neck. Her hair was slicked back, her makeup sharp enough to cut. She didn't walk behind him. She walked beside him. Her hand rested on his forearm, not for support, but in a claim of ownership. They walked to the center of the room. Cillian O'Malley stood there, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking like a man who had seen a ghost. "Dante," O'Malley smiled nervously. "We heard rumors. We heard you were incapacitated." "Rumors are like weeds, Cillian," Dante said, his voice smooth and projecting to the back of the room. "You have to pull them out by the root." "And your lovely bride," O'Malley nodded to Sienna. "I trust the honeymoon was relaxing?" Sienna smiled. It was the smile she had worn when she pulled the trigger in the alley. "It was educational, Mr. O'Malley. I learned a lot about pest control." A ripple of uneasy laughter went through the room. "We are here to discuss the shipping routes," O'Malley said, trying to regain control, "and the unfortunate business in Naples. I assure you, Dante, I had nothing to do with that rogue faction." "Of course not," Dante said, "just like you had nothing to do with Matteo." At the mention of the name, 2 of Dante's guards dragged a man into the room from the side entrance. It was Matteo. He was beaten, broken, but alive. The room gasped. Betrayal was common, but public airing of dirty laundry was rare. "Matteo has been singing," Dante said, his voice dropping to that dangerous growl. "He told us everything. The payments, the codes, the promise you made him to take over my seat once I was dead." O'Malley's hand went to his jacket. In a flash, the room bristled with weapons. Every Don's bodyguards drew their guns. It was a Mexican standoff in the opera house. "Careful, Cillian," Dante warned. "You are outnumbered." "This is neutral ground," O'Malley shouted. "You can't kill me here." "I don't intend to," Dante said, stepping back. He turned to Sienna. "Rule 3, Dante said loudly, so everyone could hear. "This marriage means nothing. That was the agreement." He looked at Sienna, his eyes softening with an intensity that made her knees weak. "I am breaking the contract," Dante declared. "This marriage means everything, and an attack on my wife is an attack on the Rossi bloodline." He handed Sienna a gun. It was the same silver pistol from Italy, polished and cleaned. "It's your debt, Sienna," Dante said softly. "You collect it." Sienna took the gun. She looked at Matteo, the man who had smiled at her while selling them to executioners. Then she looked at O'Malley, the man who had ordered the hit. She didn't tremble. She didn't hesitate. She walked up to O'Malley. He towered over her, sneering. "You won't do it, little girl. You're just a gambler's daughter." "I'm not a gambler's daughter," Sienna said, raising the gun to his forehead. "I'm the butcher's wife." Bang! O'Malley dropped. The room erupted into chaos, but Dante raised his hand, and his men racked their shotguns. The sound froze everyone in place. "It's done," Dante announced, staring down the other families. "The debt is paid. The shipping routes are mine. The O'Malley territory is mine. Does anyone wish to file a complaint?" Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Dante offered his arm to Sienna. She took it, the gun still smoking in her other hand. "Let's go home, Mrs. Rossi," he said. "We never finished our honeymoon." They walked out of the opera house, stepping over the body of the man who tried to destroy them, leaving a room full of powerful men trembling in their wake. In the limousine, the partition raised. Dante pulled Sienna into his lap, kissing her with a hunger that consumed them both. He tasted of scotch and victory. "You realize," he whispered against her neck, "that you can never leave now. You are an accessory to murder. You belong to the darkness." Sienna pulled back, looking into his slate-grey eyes. She saw the monster there, the violence, the control, but she also saw the man who had shielded her with his body, the man who had let her stitch him up, the man who had just handed her the keys to his kingdom. "I don't mind the dark," she whispered, kissing him back. "It's where the stars shine the brightest." The honeymoon had made him lose control, but the marriage? The marriage had given him the one thing he never thought he needed, a partner who could hold the gun while he drove. And as the car sped through the rainy streets of Chicago, Dante Rossi knew one thing for certain. This marriage meant everything. And that is the story of Dante and Sienna Rossi, from a cold contract signed in ink to a blood pact sealed in lead. They say love conquers all, but in the underworld, love is just another weapon. You just have to know where to aim it. If you enjoyed this twisty, dark Mafia romance, please hit that like button. It tells the algorithm we want more stories like this. Do you think Sienna went too far, or did she do exactly what she had to do? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the bell. We drop new stories every week, and trust me, the next one is even crazier. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep your friends close and your secrets closer.